session, so I'll kick things off with a focus on children, and Frank will finish the second half with a focus on adults with hearing loss. So in terms of the motivation for, investigating psychosocial health and well-being, as Hargreaves et al. Assert, most musical activity is carried out with and for other people. So it's fundamentally social. It's a fundamentally social experience. And this is really important because it has a role in promoting interpersonal skills, teamwork, and cooperation. And when I was doing my PhD, there wasn't a lot of robust work investigating this in the context of children with hearing loss. And in fact, I would argue that the most robust work had been, up until recently, the work by Innes Brown, where they basically had created a music program for children with hearing loss in schools. But in terms of psychosocial sort of evaluation, it was really quite anecdotal. They were talking to teachers and parents. And from those reports, it suggested that there were a wide range of benefits, such as increased engagement and interest in music, socialization with peers, and also this sense of belonging. But we really wanted to extend from there. And in particular, I would argue that historically, when we talk about work with hearing aids and cochlear implants, the focus is generally around audibility, hearing capacity, particularly when it comes to capacity to listen within the classroom, being able to listen to your teacher, for example, and looking at educational outcomes. I think, though, we're finally at that stage where we're realizing the importance beyond just the classroom, where we look at what's happening outside the classroom, for example, in the playground, looking at those social interactions with other children, the development of a peer support group, and those really important social and emotional skills. So the aim of this project, this study, was to investigate the role that music might have. So we conducted a 12-week music program, which consisted of weekly group-based face-to-face music therapy, and we supplemented this with online apps, specifically for children with hearing loss. We were looking at three main areas for our outcome measures, specifically music perception, so pitch and timbre perception, speech perception, speech and noise and prosody perception. And I'm not going to focus on those today, but what I am going to focus on today is quality of life and psychosocial well-being. In particular, extending from the work by Hamish Innes Brown by using standardized and validated questionnaire measures. The participants that we had were 14 children with moderate to profound sensory neural hearing loss that ranged in age from 6 to 9 years old. They were all prelingually aided or prelingually implanted, and we had a mixed cohort in terms of device use. So 8 bilateral cochlear implant recipients, 4 bimodal kids, and 2 bilateral hearing aid users. In terms of the methodology, I'll just give you a very quick breakdown. We basically had 2 main groups of children. Group 1 came into the program and we tested them before music training. We gave them 12 weeks of music training. We tested them again after the music training. And then we had 12 weeks without music training, indicated by the dashes, and we tested them again at the follow-up phase. The second group was essentially the same as group 1, but they were waitlisted. So we had them for an additional 12 weeks at the start where they didn't do anything. And this additional component was essentially our passive control group, where we were looking at what's happening just in basic natural maturation and development. We had a third group, which consisted of typical hearing or normal hearing children, and we just wanted to look at what their data was like at the baseline, just as a comparison. So I'm going to play a selection of videos here, just so you can get a bit of an understanding of what was involved in the music therapy and what was involved in the intervention. In this video, you'll see the children having to respond to a specific emotion that the music therapist has sort of stated. And they're using a puppet proxy so that they're articulating this emotion through this puppet. So given that, most of these kids are CR recipients as well, the intonation and the pitch within their voice is really it's really quite good, and able to articulate this happy emotion. In this video, we often had these games where the children would have to pull a card, and the card would have some sort of emotion or a behavior. And one child would have to sort of tap on the drums and replicate that, and the others would have to try and guess what that emotional behavior represented.
Football!
No,
Sad!
no.
Tired!
Yes.
Tired!
So that was quite good, bored, sad, tired, all really quite close in proximity to some extent. And of course, singing is a really integral component when it comes to music as well. And so we would do a lot of singing-based exercises, a lot of call and response and turn taking.
Ooh,
Ooh.
I can sing. I can sing. Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
So again, quite a lot of really quite positive intonation there. And the final video is an example of one of the apps that the children would use at home as a sort of a homework. And this one's called Morton Subotnick's Pitch Draw. So just time along the x-axis and across the y-axis, pitch from low to high. And they were able to also change the type of instrument so that they could have multiple instruments being played as well. And I think this is really quite an excellent composition for a young girl with with hearing aids. So I'm going to jump into some of the findings and results, but I'll just give a quick overview of the statistical analyses that we were doing. So all of our analyses were conducted with a generalized linear mixed models with random intercepts. And because we did have quite a wide range of device configurations, we did put that into the model to control for it as well. Within the model as well, we also control for hearing age. So hearing age being chronological age minus the age at either implantation or aiding. The first bit of analysis that we did was to look at group 2. So group 2 had that period of the waitlisted portion where they didn't do any music training, and we wanted to look at, well, what's the effect of just 12 weeks? Is there any difference? So we didn't find any significant effect of that 12 weeks where they were just doing nothing. So any change in performance that we found is likely attributable to the musical intervention. So our main finding is centered around the strengths and difficulties questionnaire. So the SDQ is, by my understanding, probably the most widely used pediatric behavioral screener. we use the very broad categories where we have a total score and we have two other categories called internalizing problems and externalizing problems. We didn't find any significant difference for externalizing problems. And externalizing problems are things like aggression, being inattentive, being like disruptive almost. Internalizing problems are things like low mood, depression, anxiety. And we have on the x-axis our various time points. We've got baseline 1, baseline 2. So the difference between that is 12 weeks. From baseline 2 to the post is again 12 weeks. And from post to the follow-up is again 12 weeks. And on the far right, we have the typical hearing comparison group. I've highlighted this section in yellow because all of our statistical analyses was in reference to this. So significance is being gained from this reference point. So if we look at the total score, we found a significant advantage at the post time point. And encouragingly, it gets us close to where the typical hearing children are. And this is really important because we know that there is a difference in psychosocial health between typical hearing children and children with hearing loss. When we look specifically at the internalizing problems, it's even more positive. It's actually maintained at the follow-up point as well. So really quite encouraging that we were able to generate this positive outcome. We also looked at the Glasgow Children's Benefit Inventory, the GCBI. This has the advantage where we don't need to measure this at all of the time points. We just measure it at the end. And I've highlighted on the left, everything in blue are all of the factors that were significant. And on the right are all of the factors that are not significant. So we have factors such as learning, progress, progress and development, making their overall life better, making their overall behavior better, affecting their ability to concentrate, affecting confidence, and also affecting how happy and content they are. If we look on the right, it's a useful check to make sure that the data is sensible. We have things like, did the music training affect their enjoyment of food, for example? We wouldn't expect it to, and that's the case. There was absolutely no change. So we're quite happy that this seems to be quite robust data that we've captured. So in conclusion, this was the first study that explored psychosocial outcomes using validated measures, specifically for children with hearing loss. We do have the advantage where we have a very nice constrained age range. We looked at children between 6 and 11. Historically, there have been a lot of studies extending far beyond those age ranges. And it's obviously going to be quite challenging if you're trying to compare, for example, a 17-year-old to a 6-year-old. We had a passive control group, which has the advantage where we were able to track the natural development, but ideally, if we were able to incorporate another group, it would have been great to have an active control group. We had multiple repeated measures, and we also had a follow-up phase, and we even had some level of blinding. I was one of the researchers, and I had two other research assistants. So I was always aware of where the participants were, but my research assistants weren't aware of what stage the children were at. So after 12 weeks of music training, benefits were noted for learning and emotional factors, and we also found less difficulties for internalizing problems such as anxiety, depression, and low mood. So this is really quite encouraging because it suggests that music is an excellent form and a useful form of rehabilitation for children with hearing loss. And the social experience of actively engaging with music can improve psychosocial health. So that ends my portion, and I'm going to turn things over to Frank now, and we'll have a combined question session at the end. So thank you very much.
Okay, so I am continuing on the theme of psychosocial outcomes. As Chi was mentioning, the focus of many music intervention studies has been on communication or hearing type outcomes. And while we feel these are very important, there's something really um, critical that's missing if we're not tracking psychosocial outcomes. This is something that's occurred to us in my group over the last 5 or 6 years. And increasingly, we are trying to incorporate both communication outcomes and more psychosocial outcomes. So I'm going to talk to you in broad strokes about some of the motivations and some of the outcomes and some of the ideas about what's driving the findings that we're observing. So there are a myriad of challenges faced by older adults. There are also opportunities faced by older adults, but for a moment, we'll talk about the challenges. Those challenges can include depression, loneliness, social isolation, and of course, communication challenges. So this is brought on by a number of factors, including the cessation of work, the distance from families, the biological and environmental exposure effects that accumulate over a lifetime. Singing has been around for a very long time, as we know, and it's something that comes to people quite easily. It's why it's become the intervention of choice for us when we're doing music interventions. While we feel that various music interventions can be effective, and we have certainly worked with piano instruction, rhythmic instruction, so other forms of music instruction, we think that singing is a good modality to exploit for a few reasons. One, it comes easy. People are less apprehensive about getting started, even if they don't have a musical background. And there's also the potential for near transfer, if you like, in that the neural circuits that are involved in speech production and perception are not terribly different from those involved in speech perception and production. So this study was the result of graduate work by Ella Dubinsky, who's postered there. She was a poster child for a little while for the university. So in this study, we recruited people, adults who were living with hearing loss, who were not currently active in music. And we had one group engage in a choir that involved homework where they could sharpen their pitch matching skills and various auditory skills. And once a week, they got together to rehearse their pieces. At the end of 10 weeks, there was a performance, as there might be in a typical community choir. We were able to track and at the end of training. So I'm really just providing this study as an example before I turn to more broader psychosocial outcomes. So the main finding we observed here in this paper published a couple of years ago now is that the choir singing group observed an improvement in speech perception and noise. We use the Quicksin here, and so a lower score in red means an improvement. So that's an improvement compared to our do nothing control. So that's the main effect. We're very excited by that. We other groups have found similar findings with older adults with hearing loss, and we're continuing down the path of understanding who are these choir interventions good for when it comes to speech and noise. But again, we're tuning into what happens psychosocially. So what we observed in this group is that they wanted to keep singing after the 10 weeks. And we've observed this in other groups, other choirs that we've seated. And as much as possible, we try to breathe life into these communities and keep them sustainable. So in this case, we were successful. It became a program at my university that's offered through the continuing education school. So they actively recruit older adults with hearing loss into the program with the promise of potentially better hearing. So that that kind of recruitment biases participants and maybe prevents successful blinded research studies. But I think it's an exciting outcome. So I'm going to turn now to other groups other than older adults with hearing loss. And a lot of our work has been done in people living with Parkinson's. We've done a little bit of work in people living with breathing disorders, aphasia, more recently stuttering. So there's a range of communication challenges that SingWell is interested in addressing or supporting, if you like, through singing. So this is a quote from a choir member, KB. This is at midpoint in the choir intervention. So let's say at week 10 in a 14-week choir. He says that at this point, I don't feel like my Parkinson's defines me as much as it used to. Now that I've been singing with a group for a while, I feel that I'm also a singer who's part of a vibrant community. So what's happening is that there's this flip in perspective. Previously, I was coming to this group because of the deficit. I have this communication deficit. That's Parkinson's disease. Of course, it's a mobility deficit. There's all kinds of life challenges there. But now we're flipping this deficit on its head, and it's becoming an asset, if you like, because now we are a group of people living with Parkinson's disease that is overcoming our challenges, and we're thriving. So this was another success in terms of seeding a community. So this particular group became a nonprofit charity in Canada. It's a registered charity. There are chapters in different cities. And I've been invited to an annual fundraiser this afternoon that I'm looking forward to. They're not all successes like this. Often we start choirs, we take the data, we go away, and that's the end of the community. But those are two positive examples. Okay, so now to turn to the research questions that we like to track with respect to psychosocial outcomes. We ask questions like the following. Does choir support psychological and social well-being in older adults better than other activities? How do these benefits accrue over regular engagement with the choir? Do we see longitudinal type of effects? What are the social biological underpinnings of these benefits? So we make our measurements in these choirs on a micro time scale and a macro time scale. So the macro time scale is collecting some baseline measures before the group starts getting together on a regular basis, and then again at the end of the choir program. The micro measures are pre-post. So we do some measurements before they get started with singing on, let's say, a Tuesday, and then we make the same measures after they finish singing on the Tuesday. So those measures tend to include things like subjective scales of social connectedness, the extent to which people trust, like, and feel connected to other people in the group. We've heard about the PANAS in an earlier talk today. We typically measure the PANAS. We look at pain thresholds. So we use a dolorimeter for that. That involves applying pressure to the arm typically, and people say when they can no longer withstand the pressure, and we record the level of pressure we're applying, and typically we find some increase after singing. We have also been in the habit of measuring biomarkers, specifically cortisol and the neuropeptide oxytocin. So cortisol is famously associated with stress. Oxytocin seems to be implicated in social interactions. So this is the time scale of a typical choir study. We have the baseline and we have the follow-up, but then we come in on a few sessions. So let's say at week 2, at week 5, and week 8 to make those pre-post measures before and after the singing. It varies in the different studies, but our group has been using a structure like this, and other groups in the SingWell network tend to use a similar structure. We have a comprehensive set of pre-post surveys that we really encourage our partners to use. Our intent there is to accumulate some aggregate data, because something that plagues all of this research is very small sample sizes. So we're optimistic about the possibility of pooling data across multiple studies. Okay, so to show you some results now of these group singing studies when it comes to psychosocial outcomes. Here we're plotting social connectedness. Higher means I feel more connected to the people around me, lower, less connected. Here we came in and we looked at social connectedness in week 1, pre versus post singing, at week 8 and week 16. We also had a control group here. We can unpack why we looked at yoga. Very, very quickly, I'll say it's an active control. People feel good when they do yoga as they do when they sing. It's done as a group. There are pros and cons for this particular active control. That's the one we used in this instance. What you'll notice is that we get an increase in social connectedness pre-post across all of the sessions that we looked at, but the biggest pre-post improvement was at week 1. This is not an uncommon finding. It's been termed the icebreaker effect. So we're getting together with a group of strangers, we're doing this synchronous communal activity, and all of a sudden I feel really connected to these people. I see this huge improvement at week 1. We still see the pre-post effect at week 8 and week 16, but it gets smaller. And the way we think about it is that the floor keeps elevating. So the more I sing with this group, the more I connected with them uh, at baseline when I enter the room. This is already my tribe. These are my people. We're doing our thing, and I'm going to get a little boost, but not nearly the relative increase that we saw in the very first week. But that's fine because the social connectedness is improving overall from week to week. No improvement on this measure in yoga. I'm sure the yoga was doing wonderful things. This is not a conspiracy against yoga. We just weren't measuring those things. So we also looked at cortisol. So one of the things that yoga was able to do, just as well as group singing, is reduce cortisol. That totally makes sense. People feel relaxed when they finish a yoga session. They tend to feel relaxed after singing, at least when it's communal, participatory kind of singing, not competitive, high stress, elite kind of singing. Mood. So we see a mood boost. The mood boost does not quite map on to the social connectedness improvements that we typically see. So you don't get the big boost in week 1. You tend to get it later on. So at week 8 and week 16, we see a bigger mood boost. And the way we interpret that is that while we accomplish something in week 1, we also have our doubts about, can I really sing? Do I really belong here? So there might be a mix of feelings that attenuates the mood boost in week 1. I think this is an interesting control group in this case. In this case, we compared the mood boost in communal singing to individual singing. These are the exact same participants. We had them sing the same songs with the same accompaniment, except here they're singing on their own. There is no mood boost that comes from singing on your own. I won't plot this, but I'll just throw out that there is a cortisol reduction on singing on your own, not the mood boost. Pain thresholds. So the choirs in Sing Well, this is a very robust effect that we really need to document. Groups are seeing this again and again, and I think you'll start to see the first papers published soon. We're seeing increases in pain threshold from week to week. And here, the biggest effects again happen in week 1. So I think that these effects map onto the social connectedness effects. So you can think about this in evolutionary terms. I was feeling alone, but now I've found my people and I'm stronger. I'm part of a bigger, larger group. I got this big, big pain threshold increase in week 1. You don't get it from individual singing. Oxytocin, we see an improvement in oxytocin in group singing. We don't see it in individual singing. The caveat here is that oxytocin, when measured through salivary assays, is a very noisy measure. There are better assays being developed all the time. and we have more confidence in the assays now than we had in the past. But there has been some variability in the research around oxytocin effects. The most generous way of interpreting these different outcomes of oxytocin is that um, if you look at those choir studies that involved communal singing, not competitive elite singing, you tend to see an improvement in oxytocin pre-post. You don't tend to see it for competitive elite choirs. This makes sense to me. Prosocial effects. Um, so we've seen this from young children to older adults. Sometimes we use the prisoner dilemma game or economic sharing games to get at this. We find that people trust one another more and they share resources more. So if we give them a payout at the end of the study, they're more willing to share that payout with the peers that they created music with than if they weren't creating music together. So I'll give you a little bit of theory and mechanisms. So I'm just about done here. And I realize I'm skipping around here, but there will be time for questions that she and I will be happy to answer. So we think of the movement synchrony that comes from communal singing as being critical to some of these psychosocial benefits. So there's this idea that vocal grooming was prevalent in our primate relatives, but that increasingly manual grooming became too difficult as our group sizes increased beyond, let's say, 150 people. It was too challenging for everyone to groom everyone else to maintain the hierarchy and maintain the order in the group. However, if we're all singing together, we have an opportunity to increase those bonds. So it may have one of the evolutionary pressures that may have led to communal music, singing collectively may have been an extension of manual grooming. So somehow movement synchrony creates these bonds so that we trust one another and we can go out and do whatever it is that we need to do together. We have been toying around with this bread and butter theory. When we look at our groups that we're seeding and we look at how they interact, we don't think it's the singing alone that creates these bonds. We think that it's the downtime, it's the tea and cookies that they have afterwards that allows them to share stories, trust one another, build these relationships. But the way we're thinking about it is that it's those conversations that are the sustenance of the relationship. It's the bread. And you can think of the butter as something that makes that bread more appetizing. So if it wasn't for the singing, we wouldn't have these rich exchanges where we let our guard down and we're more willing to share. So that's the bread and butter theory that we're toying around with these days. Potential underlying mechanisms, we suspect that the rapid social bonding is mediated by oxytocin release. At this point, we just have some very preliminary correlational evidence. We see that collective accomplishment, be it in the young children that she talked about or the older adults, that leads a group to be proud and to have a sense of belonging. There's also multisensory skill development that's taking place. So the turn taking, the cooperation, the imitation, the emotional expression that happens in music making or group singing may transfer to other kinds of communication skills. Another thing to keep in mind is the asset orientation. I'm just about done here. That these groups are coming together because of some common deficit, something like hearing loss, Parkinson's disease, but now they're coming together to do something positive. So that's probably a critical ingredient here of positive psychosocial outcomes. And we can't forget fun. You know, music, by and large, when it's not so competitive, when it's done communally, it tends to be very fun. There's evidence of engagement of the reward system. This likely helps with adherence, which helps people continue the intervention from week to week. That message, that idea can't be understated when comparing the efficacy of music to some other kinds of psychosocial interventions. So that wraps it up. It's a very cursory kind of overlook. We're very happy to unpack any of this. Thank you for your attention. The very last plug I'm going to make is that Singwell is open. If you are interested in these kinds of projects, there is some funding to support projects. We're looking to develop bigger multi-site studies. And one such study, Chi is leading right now, and we're looking for partners. If we haven't been in touch with some of you in the audience already, we will be soon. We are going to be doing a multi-site study around older adults with hearing loss. And we want to track the communication outcomes that we talked about earlier, as well as the psychosocial outcomes. We want to do this in multiple centers um, to look at whether these results maintain. There's a little bit of controversy in the area. I think we need bigger, larger multi-site studies. This is our attempt to do a little bit of that. Thank you again for your attention.